The old truck groaned in protest as Lucas Thompson twisted the key one last time. A sickening, grinding noise echoed through the desolate Alaskan wilderness before the engine fell silent for good. He exhaled, watching his breath coil in the freezing air inside the cab. This wasn't good. Outside, the fading autumn sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Talkeetna Mountains, casting impossibly long shadows through the dense pine forest. The world around him was painted in the golden glow of dusk, but Lucas felt no warmth. He glanced at the dashboard. 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Dropping fast. He reached for his satellite phone, but when he pressed the power button, nothing happened. The screen remained black. Dead. He cursed under his breath. Of all the things to forget, charging his only lifeline had never been one of them. Lucas had spent over 2 decades documenting the wildest corners of North America. He had faced blizzards, landslides, and even a near run-in with a mountain lion in the Rockies. But this was different. He was alone, 4 hours away from the nearest ranger station, with a broken-down truck and no way to call for help. And that wasn't the worst of it. Shifting in his seat, he grabbed his camera and flipped through the photos he had taken earlier. Something had been nagging at him ever since he packed up his gear that afternoon. The bears. They weren't behaving like they should. Grizzlies were solitary by nature, especially this late in the season. As winter crept closer, they should have been focused on packing on the last few pounds before hibernation. But what he saw today wasn't natural. Instead of foraging alone, the bears were gathering in groups, moving together with an eerie synchronicity. There was a pattern to their motion, something calculated, organized. Lucas swallowed hard. He had seen a lot in his career, but never this. A flicker of movement outside his frost-rimmed windshield caught his attention. At first it looked like nothing, just a shifting shadow between the trees. Then, a massive grizzly stepped into the clearing. The bear stood still, its breath curling in the cold. It wasn't sniffing the air for food. It wasn't foraging. It was watching, waiting. Lucas' fingers tightened around the steering wheel. In the deepening twilight, more shapes began to emerge from the forest's edge. And that's when he knew he wasn't alone. Lucas sat frozen in his seat, his breath shallow, his fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel. The truck's cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of realization settled on his chest. He wasn't alone. Outside, the massive grizzly stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, its thick fur rippling in the icy breeze. It wasn't acting like any bear Lucas had ever encountered before. It wasn't rummaging for food, sniffing the air, or wandering aimlessly through the woods. It was watching him, studying him. His instincts screamed at him to move, do something, but he remained still, his pulse hammering in his ears. His hand drifted toward the ignition, but he stopped himself. It was useless. The truck was dead, and now he was trapped inside it, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by something he couldn't yet understand. Through the frost-coated windshield, he noticed movement, more shapes emerging from the tree line. At first they were just shadows slipping between the pines, their massive forms blending with the darkened forest. But as they stepped into the fading light, their hulking silhouettes became unmistakable. More bears. 1, then 2, then 5, then more. They came from every direction, slipping through the underbrush in eerie silence. No growls, no huffs, no territorial displays, just a quiet, calculated approach. Lucas counted at least 10, maybe more, but something about the way they moved made the hair on his arms stand on end. Bears were never this coordinated, never this synchronized. He raised his camera, instincts kicking in. The telephoto lens allowed him to see details his naked eye could not. The subtle head tilts, the quiet shifts in posture, the way each bear adjusted its position in response to another. They were communicating. Lucas had spent years photographing wildlife, capturing behaviors that most people never got to see. He knew grizzlies could be intelligent, adaptable, even strategic when it came to hunting or defending their territory. But this was different. The bears weren't acting individually, they were working as one. His camera clicked softly as he documented the moment, every fiber of his being telling him he was witnessing something groundbreaking. He zoomed in on the largest bear. The same one that had first appeared in the clearing. It stood taller than the rest, shoulders broad, scars crisscrossing its thick hide. A leader. The bear's dark eyes gleamed in the dim light as it turned its head ever so slightly, signaling something to the others. Immediately, the formation around Lucas's truck shifted. It was subtle, a few steps here, a few steps there, but there was no mistaking the precision of it. They were positioning themselves, closing in. His grip tightened around the camera as he snapped more photos. Why were they doing this? Grizzlies could be territorial, yes, but this wasn't a show of dominance. They weren't displaying the usual warning signs. No roaring, no pawing at the ground, no bluff charges. They were patient, methodical, and that terrified him more than anything. Lucas adjusted his position in the driver's seat, shifting his weight ever so slightly. And they noticed. The movement was small, just a subtle lean forward, but it was enough. The bears reacted instantly. 15 massive heads turned toward him in perfect unison. His stomach twisted. Wild animals didn't do that, not like this. Lucas's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he fought to stay calm. Think, Thompson, think. He checked his supplies. Food, water, emergency flares, extra camera batteries, all useful. But not if he couldn't get out of here. Outside, the circle around his truck grew tighter. Lucas's mind raced through every possible scenario. What did they want? If they were hunting him, they would have attacked already. If they were simply curious, they would have scattered at the sound of his horn. But they hadn't. They were waiting. For what, he didn't know. But one thing was certain, he was running out of time to find out. Lucas's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he watched the circle of bears shift ever so slightly around his truck. Their presence was unnerving, not just because they were grizzlies, but because they were acting with an intelligence that defied everything he knew about wildlife. They weren't posturing, they weren't scavenging. They were waiting. He tightened his grip on the camera, his instincts warring between fear and curiosity. He had to document this. He had to understand. Then he smelled it. A faint acrid scent in the cold air. At first he thought it was just his nerves playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. The unmistakable bite of smoke. Lucas's body went rigid. His eyes darted past the bears, scanning the distant horizon beyond the tree line. The sky had darkened, but there, just above the distant ridge, was an unnatural glow. An ominous pulsing orange. Fire. A wildfire. His pulse quickened as his mind processed the implications. That's why the bears were here. That's why they had gathered. They weren't hunting him. They were fleeing. Lucas twisted in his seat, looking in every direction, searching for signs of the growing blaze. The wind had been still when he arrived, but now it was shifting, bringing the scent of smoke closer. The bears had sensed it before he had. And now, as he sat trapped in his disabled truck, he realized just how much danger he was truly in. The wildfire was coming. His fingers trembled as he fumbled for his gear. He had to think. He had to plan. The truck was dead, the satellite phone was useless. He had supplies, but if the fire reached him, none of it would matter. Lucas forced himself to focus. There had to be a way out. The bears, as if sensing his realization, shifted their formation again. Their massive bodies adjusted, their eyes no longer focused solely on him, but toward the west, toward the growing glow of the approaching flames. They knew. They were reading the land, reading the fire, just like they had read each other's movements before. Lucas grabbed his camera and switched to thermal mode, his fingers flying over the controls. The screen flickered to life, revealing a chilling sight. Heat signatures, far beyond the tree line. It wasn't just the bears. Other animals were moving. Deer, wolves, even small critters. All of them were heading in the same direction. The wildfire had begun to drive the entire forest's population eastward. If he didn't move soon, he'd be trapped. A sudden movement outside snapped his attention back to the bears. Titan, the largest of them, the leader, stepped forward. His enormous paws crunched against the frost-covered ground as he lifted his great head. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze east. Lucas followed the bear's line of sight. Between two sections of dense forest, a narrow valley stretched beyond the clearing. It was a natural firebreak, a potential escape route. The realization struck him like a freight train. The bears weren't just running from the fire. They were finding a way through it. And they had included him in their plan. The other grizzlies adjusted their positions once more, forming an unmistakable pattern. A corridor. Lucas's breath hitched. He could barely comprehend what he was seeing. These wild animals weren't just reacting to the fire. They were strategizing. And in that moment, as the first ember-laced gust of wind swept through the clearing, he understood. The bears weren't his threat. The fire was, and the only way out was to follow them. Lucas' mind raced. The wildfire was no longer just a distant threat. It was coming, fast. The thickening scent of smoke stung his nostrils, and the eerie orange glow on the horizon had deepened into an ominous, flickering beacon. He looked back at the bears. They had already made their decision. They were moving. Titan, the massive leader, took the first step, his hulking frame shifting with effortless power as he turned toward the escape route. The other grizzlies followed suit, their movements fluid, synchronized. A controlled retreat, not a frantic escape. They knew exactly what they were doing. Lucas didn't. He was still trapped in his dead truck, the metal frame already coated in frost from the plunging temperatures. But if he stayed here much longer, the next thing covering his vehicle wouldn't be frost. It would be embers. He needed to move, now. His shaking fingers found the ignition once more, desperation overriding reason. He twisted the key. Nothing. He tried again. A hollow click. Come on, he muttered through clenched teeth, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. Outside, the bears were already leaving the clearing, their massive forms disappearing into the darkened forest beyond. And then, a miracle. The engine roared to life. Lucas barely had time to process what had just happened before he threw the truck into gear. The tires skidded against the frozen ground, kicking up ice and dirt as he surged forward. The moment he moved, the bears adjusted their formation, creating an escort. They weren't running ahead, they weren't fleeing in panic. They were leading him. Titan remained at the front, his powerful strides cutting a path through the rugged terrain. On either side of the truck, pairs of grizzlies flanked him, their movements precise, intentional. Lucas's breath came in rapid bursts as he gripped the wheel, navigating the uneven landscape. This was unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. These wild animals, these apex predators, were orchestrating an evacuation. The forest around them had transformed into something out of a nightmare. The wildfire had reached the ridge behind them, and Lucas could hear it now, the deep, guttural roar of an unstoppable force. Trees cracked and splintered under the heat. The distant mountains were cast in a hellish red, the flames consuming everything in their path. Sparks danced through the air like fireflies from another world. Lucas could feel the temperature rising, even inside his truck. And yet the bears pressed on. They weaved through the dense forest, avoiding fallen logs, steering clear of thick brush that could ignite in an instant. They used their instinctive understanding of the land, something no human could match, to find the safest possible path. Through the thickening haze, Lucas spotted movement ahead. Not just the bears, more animals. Deer bounded through the underbrush, their sleek forms blending into the chaos. Wolves loped alongside them, their usual wariness of other creatures forgotten in the face of the greater danger. Even smaller animals, foxes, hares, and raccoons, moved in unison, following the grizzlies' lead. It was a mass exodus. Lucas tightened his grip on the wheel. He was part of it now. The truck rumbled forward, dodging fallen branches and patches of scorched earth. The bears never strayed from their positions, adjusting only when necessary, their coordination eerily precise. Suddenly, Titan slowed. Lucas barely had time to react before a massive tree crashed down in front of him, engulfed in flames. His heart leapt into his throat. It was too late to stop. But before panic could take hold, the bears moved. Two of the largest grizzlies flanking his truck broke formation, charging toward the burning tree. Lucas watched in stunned disbelief as they used their sheer strength to shove it aside, clearing a path. They weren't just escaping. They were actively ensuring his survival. Smoke billowed across the road, and for a terrifying moment Lucas could barely see. The truck's headlights carved through the suffocating darkness, revealing glimpses of the massive creatures still guiding him forward. He didn't know how long they had been running. Minutes, hours. All that mattered was staying with them. The fire raged behind them, but the bears never faltered. Their movements, their strategy, their unwavering determination. It was something beyond animal instinct. It was something greater. And then, through the thick haze, Lucas saw it. A break in the trees. A stretch of untouched land. A way out. Titan let out a deep, resonant call. The other bears responded instantly. They adjusted their pace, funneling the smaller animals through first, ensuring every creature had a path to safety. Lucas followed. The truck burst through the clearing, the last embers of the fire's glow flickering in his rearview mirror. They had made it. But as Lucas slowed the truck, heart still hammering, he realized something even more incredible. The bears weren't leaving yet. They were standing guard, watching, making sure everyone had escaped before they too disappeared into the darkness. And in that moment, Lucas understood. These weren't just wild animals. They were protectors of the land. And tonight, they had been his. Lucas could hardly believe what he was witnessing. His truck sat idling at the edge of the clearing, the engine rumbling unevenly as he tried to catch his breath. The wildfire had been left behind, but it still raged in the distance, its fiery glow painting the night sky in violent shades of red and orange. And yet, the bears had stopped. They weren't running for deeper cover. They weren't scattering in panic like the other animals. Instead, they remained in formation, their massive bodies silhouetted against the burning horizon. They were waiting. Lucas squinted through the smoke-hazed darkness. Titan, the colossal grizzly who had been leading the charge, turned his head slightly. It wasn't random. It was calculated. The other bears responded immediately. A ripple of movement spread through the group as they adjusted positions, each bear shifting with purpose. It was almost like watching a well-trained team execute a battle plan. Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. This was beyond instinct. This was strategy. He grabbed his camera and quickly adjusted the settings, bringing the thermal viewfinder up to his eye. Through the glowing screen, he saw what his naked eye couldn't: the fire's movement. The wind had shifted again. The wildfire wasn't moving in a straight line anymore. It was curling around the ridge, racing toward another section of the forest. And the bears, they knew. Titan let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a roar, not a growl, a command. The other bears responded in kind, each letting out their own version of the sound, their bodies shifting into a new formation. Then, one by one, they began moving. Not randomly, not chaotically. They were creating a new path. Lucas's mind spun as he tried to understand. He looked past the bears, toward the direction they were heading. There, just beyond the tree line, was a creek. The natural firebreak. His heart pounded. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were diverting the fire. Titan reached the water first, his massive paws splashing into the shallow stream. He turned his head, watching as the others followed. Then, without hesitation, he plowed through the water, deliberately kicking up mud and wet debris along the banks. The other bears mirrored his actions. Lucas gasped as he realized what they were doing. They were using the creek as a fire buffer. By disturbing the wet earth, they were creating barriers of damp soil, something that could slow the fire's advance. Lucas grabbed his camera again, snapping photos as fast as his fingers could move. His brain struggled to process it, but his instincts told him one thing: this was deliberate. These bears weren't just running. They were fighting back. As the flames roared in the distance, the bears worked with almost mechanical precision, using their sheer strength to shift logs, stir up wet ground, and flatten dry brush. Lucas had heard stories, old legends about animals sensing natural disasters, about wildlife adapting in ways that science couldn't explain. But this was something else. Titan let out another low, guttural sound, and Lucas saw something that shook him to his core. The bears responding like soldiers taking orders. One by one, they repositioned themselves along the creek, standing their ground as the fire line crept closer. They were creating a stand. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His truck was safe. He could leave. But he didn't. Not yet. He had to see what happened next. The fire roared, its swirling embers casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The wind howled, shifting unpredictably. And the bears stood firm. Titan, his fur singed from their escape, raised his head high, watching, calculating. Lucas could almost swear he was thinking. Then, slowly, the fire met the dampened earth. It hesitated. The effect wasn't immediate, but Lucas could see it. The slowed momentum, the creeping hesitation of the flames as they met the bear's natural firebreak. It wouldn't stop the fire entirely, nothing could. But it would buy time for the other animals, for the land itself. And the bears had done it intentionally. Lucas sat there, overwhelmed. This wasn't just survival. This was protection. And as the last embers faded against the wet ground, Titan turned his head. Just for a moment. Their eyes met. Lucas barely breathed. Then, as if satisfied with what they had done, Titan let out one final rumbling command, and the bears, one by one, melted into the darkness. Lucas could still feel the heat of the fire on his skin as he pressed the gas pedal, his truck lurching forward through the rugged terrain. His hands were tight on the wheel, his knuckles white, but his mind was elsewhere, back by the creek where the bears had made their stand. He had seen things tonight that defied everything he knew. Wild animals don't behave like that. They don't coordinate, they don't strategize, they don't work together to contain a wildfire. And yet, they had. Titan and his grizzlies had done something beyond instinct, something deliberate, something intelligent. Lucas swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the road ahead. The ranger station was still miles away, but he had to reach it. He had to tell someone what he had just witnessed. The forest around him was eerily quiet, the usual nighttime sounds drowned out by the distant roar of the wildfire. Every so often, embers drifted down from the sky, glowing like dying stars before vanishing into the cold dirt. But Lucas wasn't alone. The animals were still running. Through his side mirror he could see them, a living river of wildlife moving in the same direction. Deer, wolves, foxes, even a massive moose with its calf. They were following the bear's lead. It was an exodus, and somehow he had become a part of it. Lucas forced himself to keep driving. The truck's headlights cut through the smoke, illuminating the narrow dirt road ahead. He had marked this route earlier. It would take him to the ranger station, if it was still standing. He didn't let himself think about that possibility. He checked the dashboard. The truck's temperature gauge was climbing, The heat from the fire had pushed the engine to its limits. He needed to get out of the danger zone before it overheated for good. Up ahead, the road twisted sharply. He barely slowed as he made the turn and nearly slammed on the brakes. A grizzly stood in the middle of the road. Lucas's heart lurched, but before panic could set in, he recognized it. Titan. The massive bear locked eyes with him for only a moment before turning, walking off into the trees, guiding him. Lucas exhaled a shaky breath. He didn't question it. He followed. The smoke thickened, making it harder to see, but Titan never faltered. The bear moved with purpose, leading Lucas through the winding back roads of the wilderness. And then, through the haze, Lucas saw it. A pair of bright floodlights piercing the night. The ranger station. A surge of relief crashed over him, but he didn't slow down. The truck rattled over the dirt path, its engine straining, but it held together just long enough to reach the clearing. Lucas barely had time to throw it into park before he was out of the cab, his legs unsteady beneath him. The station was still intact, and the rangers, they were already outside, staring at something beyond him. Lucas turned, his breath catching in his throat. The animals, all of them, were arriving. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. From the darkness, deer and elk bounded forward, followed by a pack of wolves, their usual fear of humans momentarily forgotten. Even birds, owls and ravens flew low over the treetops, drawn toward the only refuge for miles. And at the center of it all, Titan and his bears. The rangers were frozen in shock. Some reached for their radios, others for their cameras. None of them spoke. Because there was no explaining this, Lucas finally found his voice, though it was hoarse from the smoke. "You're going to want to document this." The head ranger, an older man with deep lines on his face, turned to him slowly. "What the hell is happening out here?" Lucas swallowed, glancing back at the bears, standing still at the edge of the clearing. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we just witnessed something beyond anything science has ever recorded." The head ranger followed his gaze. Titan stood tall, watching, waiting. Then, as if satisfied, he turned and disappeared into the trees. And one by one the other bears followed. The sun was rising when the first news helicopters arrived. Lucas stood outside the ranger station, the cold morning air a sharp contrast to the blistering heat of the wildfire from the night before. He could still feel the exhaustion in his bones, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. Because now the world knew. The story had already started to spread. A mass migration of animals, led by grizzly bears, fleeing an encroaching wildfire. The footage captured by the rangers, combined with Lucas's own photos and thermal recordings, painted a picture that defied logic. This wasn't just survival, it was coordination. The bears had acted with intent, with intelligence, and most baffling of all, they had helped. Scientists, reporters, and wildlife experts flooded the station, eager to see the evidence firsthand. Lucas's camera became a piece of history, each frame documenting something that shouldn't have been possible. Titan, the grizzly who had led them all, was the center of every discussion. His deliberate actions, his calculated movements, his final glance before disappearing into the wilderness. No one could explain it. The scientific community debated fiercely. Some insisted it was simply advanced animal instinct. Others argued that it hinted at a level of cognition and communication far beyond what had ever been recorded. But for Lucas, it was something more. He had seen it in Titan's eyes. Understanding, awareness, a choice. Days passed, and the fire was finally brought under control. The land was scarred, blackened, but life had survived. Thanks to the bears' intervention, countless animals had made it through the inferno, and the world took notice. Legislation was introduced to protect the grizzlies and their habitat, spurred by the undeniable proof of their role in the ecosystem. Conservation efforts doubled. Researchers set up long-term studies in the area, determined to learn more about this extraordinary event. As for Lucas, his life changed forever. His photos became iconic, appearing on magazine covers and museum exhibits. He was invited to speak at universities, at wildlife summits, at conservation panels. But no matter where he went, his mind always drifted back to that night, to the fire, to the bears, to Titan. Even now, months later, he still returned to the forest, hoping, just once, to see that massive silhouette emerge from the trees again. But Titan never reappeared. And somehow Lucas knew he never would. Some stories, he realized, weren't meant to be fully understood. Some were simply meant to be remembered. Nature has always been a teacher, revealing truths about life that we often overlook. The story of Titan and his bears is more than just an extraordinary event. It is a lesson in survival, leadership, and the silent wisdom of the natural world. These bears didn't just flee the wildfire, they took action. They anticipated danger, coordinated their movements, and even protected other creatures along the way. Their choices weren't driven by fear, but by something deeper, a sense of duty to their land and to those who depended on them. For us, the lesson is clear. In times of crisis, we have two choices: to retreat in fear or to stand with purpose. Like Titan, we can face challenges head-on, using our experience and instincts to guide others. We can protect, we can lead, and most importantly, we can act with intention. As we grow older, our role shifts from striving for personal success to ensuring that those who come after us are prepared. Wisdom is meant to be shared, just as Titan shared his with the wild. Because in the end, true strength isn't just about survival, it's about leaving a legacy of courage and compassion. The story of Titan and his bears reminds us that the natural world holds mysteries far beyond our understanding. It challenges what we think we know about intelligence, cooperation, and compassion. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to explore more powerful tales of survival, loyalty, and resilience.